Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how Boris Johnson's crew were dealt a huge blow yesterday. Johnson is reported to be fuming over Sunak's protocol agreement. It's not because he doesn't like it, but because it has completely humiliated him and bolstered Sunak's position. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So the agreement which Rishi Sunak was able to announce yesterday, realistically, it was sorted a couple of weeks ago at least. There was even some suggestion it could have been announced last week. The reason it's only just been published is not because of some finishing touches were being put to it from a point of view of the legal text, but because of the political finishing touches were being put to it. Sunak had three major groups opposing his agreement, which, remember, represents a very new Brexit policy of working with the EU instead of against them. The DUP, the ERG and Johnson's loyalists. Now, I'm going to be discussing each group separately in the context of this agreement. May even do the ERG this afternoon. We'll have to see what happens. But I want to focus on Boris Johnson here. Johnson had recently gone on record as being opposed to this agreement, even though he hadn't read it, and saying that the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill was the way forward. He got increasingly desperate, in fact. Well, Sunak's deal has actually impressed Tory MPs. There are reports of them being amazed at the improvements in it, and the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill is now going to be scrapped. Boris Johnson has said a thing, and Rishi Sunak has gone, no, we're not doing that, that's silly. But it's worse than that for Johnson. Ever since Boris Johnson launched his protocol deal, he has tried to argue that it would not mean a border in the Irish Sea. When it did mean a border in the Irish Sea, he said, I didn't think that was going to happen. What on earth? What's going on here? You know, he was claiming it meant unfettered movement of goods between Britain and Northern Ireland. This is not what the agreement said. The text of the Northern Ireland Protocol only says unfettered access from Northern Ireland to Great Britain, not the other way around. And there was, of course, a trade border in the Irish Sea, but Sunak's agreement does sort of get rid of it. There will be checks, but the only checks taking place between Britain and Northern Ireland are for the goods bound for the Republic of Ireland, which nobody has a problem with. It's not that the unicorn deal has suddenly emerged. You know, those people sending goods from Britain to Northern Ireland, it's not like being back in the old days. They're still going to have to deal with some documentation, more than was required before Brexit. But the symbolically awful checks on goods passing from one part of the UK to another will not now be required. There are other benefits in the agreement as well, which people did not expect Sunak to get. It is the sort of agreement which, if Johnson had arranged back in 2019, wouldn't have caused anywhere near the level of political anxiety since. What Rishi Sunak has done is to arrange the deal that Johnson could and should have several years ago. And he's done it in just a few months. Johnson was bashing his head against a brick wall over this for years. And there's a final victory for Sunak in all this as well. The press conference with the Prime Minister and the EU Commission President yesterday made clear that this agreement was the result of partners negotiating in good faith with mutual trust. Boris Johnson and his gobshite sidekick David Frost adopted a strategy of behaving very badly indeed. They threatened political stability in Northern Ireland. They threatened to tear up the treaty that they both negotiated in order to win concessions. You know, they were going to take this strong arm approach. They won nothing, other than the risk of an unwinnable trade war and certain political doom. So it's not just that Sunak himself has succeeded where Johnson's failed, or that Sunak has cleared up part of the Brexit mess left by Boris Johnson. Sunak has demonstrated that our national interest is served by working with our allies in partnership rather than treating them as opponents or even enemies. It is a defeat for the hard Brexit mentality. But it's also a defeat for Johnson's reputation as a deal maker. In order for Boris, because that's what Boris Johnson tried to claim. He got the deal that Theresa May couldn't. He unlocks the puzzle here. Now Sunak's done that. You know, in order for Boris Johnson to bring Sunak down and become Prime Minister again, assuming that's what he still wants, his closest allies certainly still want that, he had to persuade a majority of MPs that not only was this desirable, but that the benefits would outweigh the reputational damage that having a third leadership contest in a year would do to the party. Well, Tory MPs are looking at this agreement now, looking back at the past few wasted years and wondering what benefit they get from Boris Johnson being back in charge at all if it did no reputational damage to them. No wonder Nadine Dorries was fit to burst yesterday. Oh, she was raging as well. In that press conference, von der Leyen said, as soon as the agreement was finalised, the UK would be back in the Horizon research programme. It's clear from reports that the vast majority of Tory MPs are delighted that this agreement has been reached. Bear in mind, most of them would have been happy with any agreement. They just wanted it dealt with. But they've been blown away with how well it deals with concerns. They'll also be very excited about Horizon entry. The only thing that they can scupper that now is Tory rebels, but the rest of the party are not going to allow that to happen. This agreement does what they wanted it to do. The alternative was a trade war that they know would finish them off at the next election, and they are no longer likely to believe the nonsense that the only way to get concessions from the EU is to behave badly. They were behaving badly for years. What did they get out of it? A very contentious deal. Rishi Sunak's gone straight to the EU and gone, look, this is all ridiculous. We should behave like grown-ups. A few months later, he's got the deal that everyone wanted. Sunak has completely cut the rug from under their feet. I've seen the odd report suggesting that he's not over the line yet, because Sunak has now promised to vote. He hadn't done before, but he's now promised to vote. He says he's going to give MPs time to read it all, which presumably means giving them the time to learn to read. But this is nonsense, really. Not only do most MPs never read anything they vote for anyway, so they don't really need to learn how to read, but influential members of the ERG have been gushing with praise for this agreement. There will still be a few of them chuntering. If a few of them want to complain, that's up to them. But they don't have the numbers to do anything other than make themselves look silly. On Sunday, Mark Francois turned out again, saying he wasn't stupid. Well, he's looking a bit stupid now. The front pages of the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, the Daily Telegraph, all today, all hard Brexit papers, which at some point or other in the last few years have urged war with France over Brexit, have front pages hailing this agreement. Boris Johnson completely messed up the handling of this. Had he remained at least neutral, if not supportive of Sunak's efforts, he could have tried to claim that all Sunak did was finish off the work he had been doing for several years beforehand. People would have said absolute nonsense. They would have been claim and counterclaim, but the public would have had no idea. They'll just believe whoever they wanted to believe. But Johnson completely blew away any hopes of claiming any credit for this at all. He argued against it. He said that the protocol should just be disapplied through the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill. He nailed his colours to the mast of a ridiculous position, a losing position, and now he's stuck there. A BBC editor said that one Tory MP told them that the deal was so good it would finish Johnson off, that he has nowhere to go now. Now, even if this Tory MP is a strong supporter of Sunak, and it's what he desperately wants to believe, they're right. On every level, this agreement shows that Sunak has achieved where Johnson failed. Dan Hodges of the Mail said that a senior Eurosceptic had told him, Rishi's played a blinder, much better than Boris. If these sorts of comments are as widespread as we are led to believe by various correspondents, then Sunak has won over the pragmatic and more hardline Brexiteers. Not all of them. There will be some. Mark Francois, Jacob Rees-Mogg, maybe Peter Bone, people like that, Bill Cash. Maybe some of these people are still sat in the corner going, you got what we wanted. But there's hardly any of them. When Steve Baker comes out and says this is a brilliant deal, then that's it. It's game over. Where does Boris Johnson fit into the Brexit landscape now? His approach has been exposed as a monumental failure. It not only secures Sunak's position, even if the local elections go as badly as everyone expects them to, but it means MPs may be even more willing to trust his judgment on other matters as well. Sunak's problem has been that he cannot get legislation through Parliament because there is always one major group of MPs threatening to vote against it. He has lacked the authority to tell his MPs to behave. This one move won't necessarily reverse all of that completely, but it will help. And if he takes full advantage and starts to get other agreements which improve our situation with a more pragmatic direction, he may actually end up in charge of his party by the time the election comes around. Put it this way. I no longer think there's a window for a general election this year. That essentially hinged on there being enough Tory MPs willing to stop Sunak governing. In other words, a block of about 40 or 50 of them willing to vote against his budgets, vote against his legislation, but for the majority of Tory MPs to be opposed to another change of leader. Under those conditions, only a general election would solve it. So that was the landing zone for a snap election. It was always a small chance, But that was how it would happen. Now it looks all but impossible. The local elections will be bad for the Tories, they'll be good for Labour, but it was always going to be that way. Last year's local elections were bad when Johnson was in charge, and 2023 were always the local elections the Tories were going to be most vulnerable to. The economic outlook, I mean, that can only get better as the year goes on, regardless of their policies. As for the extra squeeze this year, I think it's foolish. They're going to be putting up the cost of energy, the cost of fuel, as well as maintaining real terms pay cuts in the public sector. But the Tories think they'll get away with that by easing the pressure next year when the election, because that's what they always do. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. Oh, the election's in 6 months. Right, loosen the purse strings a little bit. Tell them the tap's on now and it's going to stay on. After the election, they vote back into power. JK lol. Close it back again. That's what they're hoping to do. And they'll think it'll work. They'll think it'll work. So there's no reason for them to now tear themselves apart and have an election this year. I think Sunak may even grow in confidence here. I actually wondered if he was having a joke with us. The press conference yesterday, I couldn't believe it. He said that this agreement means that the food available on the shelves in England, Scotland and Wales will also be on the shelves of Northern Ireland. Said it with a straight face. Does he mean the air on the shelves where the tomatoes used to be? Was he taking the piss? The food situation in Britain is now such that the reports of some pizza chefs not using tomato sauce for their bases. I don't have a problem with that. I actually prefer barbecue sauce in the base, but it doesn't matter. That uses tomatoes as well. But the idea of Sunak saying that Northern Ireland can have our food availability, that just felt like a piss take to me. I wonder if he did it deliberately or if it was unintentional. But anyway, although you can never say anything for sure when it comes down to matters which MPs ultimately decide, it's now hard to see this as anything other than the end of Johnson's campaign to destabilise Sunak. Yes, maybe Sunak will make a massive mess of something else down the line, but you wouldn't bet the farm on it. This was a huge defeat for Johnson, almost certainly a conclusive one as well. He's now stuck. He's stuck with nowhere to go. Brexit was his one thing, nowhere to go. Ukraine, I suppose he tried to make his other thing, but, Sunak's not out of lockstep on that one. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.